This week on A to Z Running, we react to an outstanding comment in a Hobbs Kessler interview about the costs and benefits of training.
In the world of running, Tokyo Marathon served upsets by upstarts as well as title defenses all in one race.
The last little bit of indoor track action in the U.S. was once again dramatic, if not earth-shattering.
And if you can name one thing about either the men's or women's U.S. half marathon champs, you'll be in the minority.
All this and more on A to Z Running.
Welcome back to A to Z Running, where we help runners thrive with information, inspiration, and coaching and training services. I'm Andy.
And I'm Zach. You can learn everything about our services at AtoZrunning.com, and then follow us the places where we share content the most: Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify, among others. And I promise you that I am pronouncing the letter N at some point in my words, but you will not be able to hear it because of my congestion.
Bummer.
So be forewarned, and my apologies. But that may be true, and yet we still have a lot of great things to share.
We do.
With you. Before we get to it, I should note, because I prefaced this last week, that I am on the road to recovery with those fractures in my foot, the result of that highly unlikely incident that we shared previously and will not need to go back into ever again. But mad shout outs to the people in whose care I am well kept, including Adam Homolka with Endurance Rehabilitation in West Michigan. And if those of you listening are thinking, well, that's no help to me, Zach, that Adam Homolka and Endurance Rehab are in West Michigan, because I'm not. Well, they do virtual consultations as well. So in the case that you find yourself lacking for good support in the physical therapy department, there's always options. But I have a few more weeks of no running on solid ground and lots of exercises to get me fully functional again, mostly around coordination and stability and alignment stuff. That was one of the things I was the most afraid of right away, of having to be in a boot, which I'm glad I didn't have to be in a boot after a couple of weeks. But is the alignment stuff, because you spend so much time asymmetrical in your movements, and sure enough, when I go in there to see Adam, he's like, oh yeah, only a couple of weeks in a boot and your hips are all whacked up. So that's that, and we're on our way.
That's good news.
That is
good news. Now let's get started with a conversation about the costs and benefits of training.
Well, in a recent interview with Track and Field News, which is a great source on Track and Field News, the thing that they do that you're not going to find anywhere else is the nitty-gritty goings-ons in track and field, because these are the people who really care about all things in the sport.
And they have access.
And they do have access. And so Track and Field News interviewed Hobbs Kessler, the recent double U.S. indoor champion. And he was sharing about his coaching and training difficulties in the last couple of years. And it was a fascinating interview, but also he made a few particular comments that they just really stood out to me. And I thought we should spend some time on this on air with our audience, because it's just really profound stuff. Or maybe it's not necessarily that it's profound, but it's important. And the fact that he was sharing about it is what was profound, because the pros don't usually talk this in depth about their struggles and what they do to overcome them or get around them, at least not in specificity. And so, not that Kessler was being that specific. He mentioned going through a rough patch back in 2023. So if you've been following Hobbs Kessler's career, he rose to prominence quite suddenly in the year 2021 as a high school senior.
Yep.
When he ran a high school 1,500 meter record of 3:34, which is impressive. And at the time, I think it was faster than the collegiate record in the same event. Yard Nagoose having run about the same time to set the collegiate record when he was at Notre Dame. And so Hobbs Kessler, as a high schooler, was running as fast as the best collegians ever. And so Adidas signed him as a pro that summer. Fresh out of high school, pro contract. He didn't even run in college at all. And so that was significant. And then he went on to basically do what everyone thought he would do, which was nothing at first. Because how often does a high schooler straight out into the pro scene have immediate success? And the answer is a thing mo. Aside from that, no one. But she wasn't even fresh out of high school. She still ran a year in college.
1 year.
Yes.
Come on. It's
Donovan
a similar
Brazier
situation, yeah.
ran a year in college. But no, the answer is almost nobody. I mean, that was
Wilson.
It was an Alan Webb situation too. He spent a little bit of time at the University of Michigan. Like Hobbs Kessler skipped all of that and just went straight for it and did not have immediate success. He was good right out the gate, but he was so inconsistent, which many people were like, well, you can just grant that to him.
He's young, yeah.
Right. But he ended up having a stretch around the year 2023 where it just looked like he was not doing anything special and not going anywhere. And he talked about that in the interview. And the interviewer then asked him a follow-up question, specifically, can you distill, I'm quoting, can you distill what changes you made to get out of that doldrums, their words? Imagine it's nuanced and depends on where you are in the season, but generally speaking, can you tell us about it? And so what they were alluding to was after that stretch in 2023, Hobbs Kessler then proceeded to be the World Road Mile champion, World Bronze Indoor 1,500 meter medalist. I said that very poorly, but the Indoor World Championship bronze medalist, and then 5th place in the Olympics, right? All in a stretch of 9 months after this rough patch he was going through. And so they're like, okay, and now you're a WS champion and the number 3 fastest indoor miler ever, like all these kinds of things. So tell us about it, is what they're saying. And here was his response. This is interesting. He said, well, really, we started thinking about all training in terms of stimulus versus fatigue. So how much better am I getting for how much cost? And I started thinking about it like that. Every bit of training you do costs something, but you also get something. And really trying to maximize that relationship and do training that is really high value so I get a lot of stimulus with not a lot of fatigue cost.
Ding, 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 ding.
And he went on to say that really opened the door and I think really helped. That just also not doing anything willy-nilly. We're weighing every workout I do. How long is it going to take me to recover? What's the effect going to be like? We're just kind of doing almost like a little bit of thought experiment on how each bit of training affects everything and why we're doing that type of training. Really interesting stuff. Now, I also learned during this interview that Hobbs Kessler has a very active role in his training. And he specifically...
Usually in that training coach-athlete relationship, the person that's most active, though, is the one who's running.
Come on. Don't give me this. So, more than you generally hear in the pro running scene, Kessler has a lot to say about what he's doing in his training, and the interviewer was asking him about that because apparently his coach, who is both his dad and another coach, are coaching him together, and apparently they're trying to wrest some of that control from him, and they're saying it's for his benefit, like that he can not be so focused on the details, but he actually likes to be involved at that level, and it's uncommon, and so I think it's kind of cool to have a young professional athlete like that who's like, no, I've got a lot to say about what I'm doing and I want to be involved in the decision making.
Which I think makes sense to a lot of us, especially those of you who listen to this podcast, because I would assume if you're listening to this podcast, you like to understand training and running. And that's exactly what Kessler is trying to do. He's trying to understand his training so that he can better execute what needs to be done in order to reap the benefits.
So, yes, that is true. But it also then got us thinking, well, what he's talking about is like, that's really important for all runners to potentially be able to grasp in what we're doing. And what does it look like to actually try to quantify this? And what happens when we apply the principle then to our training based on that knowledge?
Yeah.
So keep in mind, in the not 1880s, the 1980s, Dr. Keith Livingstone wrote about Lydiard's training methodology in his book, Healthy Intelligent Training. He was trying to capture that methodology, and he frequently used the term efficient to describe the rationale for certain training decisions that Lydiard was making. And that word efficient rings a lot of bells here. So we want to spend some time on that. What does he mean by efficient? in this context. What does this have to do with Kessler's stimulus versus fatigue reflection? And how are those principles applying one to another? And why would making this change then actually like help someone's training? Why would that help us to try to adopt these thoughts in our own approach? And then ultimately, how could we potentially explain how this made a difference for someone like Hobbs Kessler, how this makes a difference for us, what it actually does for us? So we're going to walk through this a little bit. We're going to react to Kessler's comments by trying to find what this means for us as we are running, as us being you all listening, and us and everyone else. All right. So what does it mean to be efficient in training? Let's start there, because that word matters a lot. Training efficiency is the idea that you stimulate the system enough to induce or encourage adaptation, but not so much as to necessitate significant recovery. So you begin the process of inducing adaptations, and then you withdraw. And as those adaptations begin to occur, you then do so again, and you repeat that. So if, for example, if we run too much intensity in one session, what happens? We build up lactate ions in our bloodstream, and that destabilizes our pH balance, and now we need 24 to 48 hours to regain a balanced pH system to fully recover or clear the lactate ions. Well, if we get intensity right, you begin to induce the lactate state, but you stop exercise before you become totally saturated, and you don't need as much time to recover. You still need some time to recover as best, but not as much. How about on the other side of it? If we run too much volume, what happens then? Especially, by the way, if you run too much volume at too high of an effort, then what happens is we damage our mitochondria, essentially, and to the degree that sometimes it takes multiple weeks to fully recover. This is what the Hansons have been railing against for years in the Hansons method, and what Luke Humphrey wrote about specifically in his book. And the point is that when you run too long at too high of an effort, then you create a kind of cellular fatigue, specifically your mitochondria, your powerhouse, that does take significant amounts of time to fully recover. It doesn't mean you can't train still, but if you keep doing it, it's even worse. So that's a problem. But if we get the volume right and the degree of effort right within that volume in particular, we can induce fat adaptation. For fuel, we can expand our capillary beds in our muscle tissues, and all of that without creating significant fatigue to our cells to the degree that we need so much time to recover. So that's what efficiency means. We get that right. Mm-hmm. We get enough of an adaptation to benefit, but not so much that we're exhausting things to a significant degree. So one of the problems here is that this idea of efficiency is somewhat counterintuitive to the go hard attitude common in fitness culture.
Right. I agree. And I think that as a culture, it's possible, just in general, that we're used to going hard in life. We're used to going hard, and we don't really know, we're not intuitive enough in ourselves to know when things are too hard. Not just in running. I think just in general, we're just used to pressing and going and striving and working. And so we think that we're running the appropriate efforts, but in reality, we're pressing too hard because we're used to pushing.
Yeah. The weight room bros are the worst at this kind of dynamic, because it's like, just everything's like grunt and groan and roar with all of your, like, you watch all those Instagram people saying how, hyped and hardworking everything is, right? And it's just none of that's really good for us.
Well, not for runners, but there is we talked about that last week, the different types of strength, and so it depends on what you're trying to achieve.
Well, yeah, in a sense, except this go hard past the point of adaptation that's a bad attitude toward fitness. You're far more likely to improve much less because you do too much than need to recover too much. And so you improve less over time. You're also far less likely to enjoy the exercise when you're doing this because it makes you suffer too much. You're familiar with the idea of desirable difficulties. And that's actually a very motivating thing for humans in general in any pursuit. A degree of difficulty that makes it so it's not boringly easy, but it's not so difficult that we feel like we can't be successful. Well, too much difficulty is demotivating. Even if we feel like we want to do it in the moment, repeat that over time, and that's where emotional burnout comes from with these kinds of things. It's just like, I just don't want to do this anymore because the idea of it is itself too great an obstacle for me to surmount. And that's going to happen with the go hards. And then also just, we're going to get hurt. We're going to burn out. We're going to, all the overdoing things physiologically that happens. It induces a cortisol state of stress hormones that the greater that cortisol state, the more stress we experience in other areas of life too. And so we have to be very careful here.
And we mentioned this before, but I think it's worth saying again that a lot of times that's desirable too because you see quick satisfaction, you see quick outcomes, and sometimes you can improve in a short amount of time, but then it plateaus off and you never see your potential. And so it's not the greatest way to continue on getting better and better. So anyway, I thought I'd mention that because that is something that people desire.
Yeah. So in summary, efficient training is more effective, it's more healthy, and it's more fun. So now you're going to do it because we said that. I'm quite sure. But let's talk about how you know how much you can do and how we can actually understand whether or not we are being efficient in our training. And then we'll wrap it up with talking about the approaches and what they actually look like. So there's really only one question of how to be efficient. There's only one question, which is how to be efficient. And Kessler used the simple field test in his interview. This is how he said it, because the interviewer naturally asked him, "Well, how do you know?" And he said, "If you feel too tired, then that's too much." And his quote specifically was, "It's really just how tired it makes you. So it's pretty easy to figure that one out. Because if you go too hard and can't run the next day, it's too much. So you can look at it as how much it costs you on the next day and how much it costs you a few weeks down the road and everything like that. So we're just trying to fit doing as much in a big scale within a long period of time as I can." And that's the clincher. It's not about how much I can do today. It's not even about how much I can do this week. It's about how much I can do this season, this year. And when you start thinking about it that way, it becomes mind-boggling because now we're playing 4D chess, like chess in space and time. And that's what 4D chess means, people, when you hear the political people talking about that.
Oh, I've never heard of that before.
So. Oh, yeah. They always, it's not just political, but it's a phrase people toss around. Really, it's actually 3D chess, by the way, if you want to be accurate.
Okay. Well,
but anyway,
continue on.
Space and time. You have to start trying to think about what you're doing today as a part of a bigger whole. And that is really important, but also it's even more difficult. It's even more difficult because we don't actually know how to measure that very well.
And Zach had said earlier, because we said that this is a good way to do it. No, it's because Hobbs Kessler said it was a good way to do it, that you should also listen because the proof is in the pudding. Okay,
and
guys?
Arthur Lydiard and Jack Daniels.
I mean, so many.
Everybody.
So many. But speaking specifically of Hobbs Kessler, one of the one of the hesitations that people have, one of the suspicions people have is that if you don't go all out in training on a regular basis, that you won't be tough enough to go all out in a race. Well, did you see Hobbs Kessler when he was going back and forth with Yard Nagus with that world record indoor? I mean, Hobbs Kessler ran the second fastest time in history at that point, just because Yard Nagus had beat him out for the world record. That man went to the pain cave in order to do that. So he is able to strategically make his way to that kind of digging deep performance without crushing himself in training to do so.
Yeah, it's just a false assumption that you have to experience that in some regular capacity in training to be able to do it in competition. And the reason it's a false assumption is because that's what competition is for. And so Hobbs Kessler does not race only one important race a year or something, or a season. He races like 7 or 8 times during a season. Well, that's when you're putting those kinds of things to the test. And even then, even if you didn't do it that often, it's still not necessary to do it that often. But how do we figure this out for ourselves then? At least, how do we get this big picture sense? And we have two basic ways to approach this. Outside of understanding how training phases fit together and putting the puzzle pieces together at a physiological level, we're not going all the way down that road yet. We're at least thinking about, how am I feeling today and how am I feeling after several days or this week, and being able to apply that to then decision making. And so there's two ways that you should feel, daily and weekly. Every day you should feel fairly fresh at the start before you run. And I say fairly fresh. You don't have to feel chipper and amazing every single day, but you should feel fairly fresh at the start of an activity, and reasonably, or as Lydiard always said, pleasantly fatigued at the end of an activity. So you get done feeling like, yeah, I just did something, but it's not, I don't feel wrecked. Ever. Okay? Ever in training. That's what we're talking about here. As a general rule, that doesn't mean this is the only thing all the time, but as a general rule, fairly fresh at the beginning and reasonably fatigued at the end. How about each week then? You apply a similar mindset. Each week you should feel like you are managing and maintaining the exercise load. Like, this is something I can handle indefinitely. I feel like I'm doing fine. And no increasing fatigue or increasing sense of struggle, either executing or motivating yourself to execute your training. So you shouldn't have that sense. They talk about this all the time in marathoning, where it's like this marathon fatigue that you get in training. You should not have that. That is a bad thing. That means you are slightly over the line of levels of training, either loads or intensities or both.
Well, there's an amount of fatigue that you're going to feel, but not there is a range of fatigue that if you get to a certain point that's not okay. Because like you said, when you're marathon training, like, you're going to recoup and you're going to do your mobility afterwards, and after your long run you might feel like you need to rest a bit, and that's normal. Yeah, but by Monday we want you to feel good again.
Right, that's the point. So like, managing and maintaining the exercise load. Every week you feel like, yeah, I can handle this fine. This is going well. But in order to apply that principle in a microcosm, each day you would feel reasonably fatigued at the end of the run, but you still need to feel fairly fresh again the next day. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Now, your long run may be a day where it's like, I don't feel quite as fresh at the start of the next day, which may be okay, but even then, that should only be the case initially. And this goes back to, like, we'll talk about training approaches in a little bit, but we're not going to go into this kind of detail in it. The idea that you're constantly building your long run each week until you get to the end of the season is a very bad training philosophy. Like, it is counter physiological. And the reason for that is because what you're doing is you're basically saying every week increase the stimulus, but don't give yourself enough time to adapt to that stimulus before you increase it again the next week. Well, that doesn't make any sense. So what ends up being the case is you're not adapting as fully as you should to the training. You should spend more time sustaining the training load, not like build up to a point and then hold it for several weeks. Don't just keep building. And that's part of why you feel this like marathon fog and fatigue, is because of the way you're doing that type of thing, if that's the way you're doing it. So that's one piece of it. Now, again, we're speaking in generalities. Individual circumstances may not always look exactly like that. But how am I feeling today? How am I feeling over the course of the week? And then we can start talking about big picture trends, which are more complicated beyond that. But those are the most helpful, simple ways to evaluate it for ourselves.
Can I give an example? I have an athlete who, as we discuss with athletes, we talk about like how things feel and talk about the different runs within the week. And she was very wise in her reflection, where she said, oh, my steady run at the beginning of the week always feels so fast, so good. And by the end of the week, I just feel drained and I don't feel like I can do the work. And so we dialed back the effort. And even though it felt really good on Monday, sometimes you don't feel it afterwards. Maybe you feel like it's pleasantly fatigued after that run, but then compiling the rest of the week, there's just not enough rest for the amount of effort put in. So then that means she needed to dial back her effort, even though it felt manageable on that day, in order to receive all the adaptations that were available to her for the week.
I like that. Available to you. Your opportunity to adapt is before you. That, to illustrate the point, that conversation we have on a regular basis with our athletes, even the same athletes over and over, because for not
and
to
self-talk
criticize,
over and over.
Yeah, because it's just something that happens. Yeah. But it is talking. I was talking with an athlete as well in the exact same capacity, and just recently, and the athlete was saying, Fridays are really tough for me right now, and the first question was, how do you feel on Wednesday? How do you feel on Thursday? And it's like, okay, based on all of that, slow down your runs on Tuesday. That is it. Just slow down your runs on Tuesday, and you will be fine. And that was exactly what happened. And what it amounts to is you have to have both things in mind. Daily, how am I feeling at the beginning and the end? And weekly. Because if I feel great at the beginning and the end of my runs on Monday and Tuesday, but I'm feeling awful by the end of the week, that's a sign that I may be overdoing it, which is exactly the point. So you have to be able to then say to yourself that I am doing this for more than just today's workout and whether or not I feel like I did enough work today. I have a bigger picture in mind. And because I understand that bigger picture, I know that even though I feel like I could have gone harder today, I didn't need to achieve the intent and the purpose, which are the same thing as for my training. That's it. This
isn't real math, but it's understanding math, okay? So if you needed to give 70% in order to get 100% of your adaptation, but there was a range, 70 to 80% to get that adaptation, why wouldn't you do the 70% to get 100% of the adaptation?
Well, so that's actually not a bad way to think about it. Obviously, this is imperfect math because we're just making up numbers.
Right.
That's what statistics are, made up numbers. So
no.
Sometimes
I guess.
So the point here actually is closer though than what you would guess. So it's something like if 80% effort gives you 100% adaptations, but 70% effort gives you 98% adaptations, you're better to do the 70% effort because 81% effort gives you 90% adaptations. And 82% effort gives you 85% adaptation. So you get my point. By getting too close to the line, you start to risk and jeopardize a lot for a very little gain. And it may not actually be a gain at all. So
right. Well, because you can't go and then repeat in 2 days.
Well, no, right. In principle, if you get it perfectly right, you're in the sweet spot. But you're not going to get it perfectly right every time if you're trying to ride the line. So don't try to ride the line. And that was what Lydiard constantly said to his athletes. And Barry McGee echoed it with us as we've consulted with him over the years. And he said, train, don't strain. Because the straining is crossing the line. And so you never feel like you are overdoing it. But I think we've communicated the point clearly.
Yes.
So now we have to talk about, well, what are those approaches? What do they actually look like? And we're just going to give a couple quick examples of some things to contrast some of the mindsets and then also express how these things they're everywhere. This is not one person's approach. This is not one idea. And so as Kessler noted in his own response, the best approach here is one that responds to your own current situation, the one that accounts for how your body is responding to today's training in order to make tomorrow's decisions. And as so far as you can do that, then the exact details of what you're doing in training are not that important. They are not that important as long as you understand the big picture and how to move toward a goal physiologically. And then you understand there are certain kinds of efforts that are more and less effective in that process. And when you do them matters more than what you do, whether you do them early in a training cycle or later in a training cycle, that type of stuff. Understand those kinds of big picture concepts, and then the exact approach is mostly the details. So, which, by the way, let me just underscore, that's why pro athletes so often have major bumps, successful bumps in their career right after they switch coaches. It's not because the new coach had some revolutionary idea, because a lot of times you get an athlete who leaves one coach, Coach A, they leave to go to Coach B, and then they have success. And someone else left Coach B to go to Coach A, and then they had success. It's because they're making a slight adjustment and refining the approach a bit. And so whether or not that happens with a new coach or the same coaches. Kessler's a testament to the fact that you can kind of do it in a collaborative way here. Mm-hmm. So anyway, let's talk about a few of these thoughts. We should mention the 80-20 rule, because that's going to sound like, oh, that's what they're talking about there, which is being efficient in training. 80-20 rule says 80% easy effort, 20% hard effort, I guess. That is too narrow of a perspective, and it's not helpful enough to be generalizable. But also, it doesn't really account for things like degrees of intensity, the spectrum of efforts, and things like that. And like, so is the 20% like only if it's at a certain heart rate or above? Like, how are you quantifying that? And the answer to it, of course, is 80-20 is not actually a very helpful rule, because when we talk about training stimulus, we don't just talk about high and low effort. We also talk about high and low volume. And should you be doing 50% of your running in single runs that are higher volume, or like it doesn't answer enough of your questions.
There is one way that it's helpful, though, because I think for some people it's just a very simple way to think, like, I'm running too hard too often. So that just people mentioning the 80-20 rule is almost just like saying, do more easy running.
Well,
you know what I mean? Like, I think in that way, even though it's oversimplified and not specifically helpful, I think in general it's helpful for people to realize, oh, okay, I am doing too much of my percentage of training at an effort that isn't going to be sustainable.
Yeah, yes, but this is part of why the degrees, the spectrum of efforts is difficult. I agree with that. Mm-hmm. Because then it's like, we talk with athletes about the difference between a steady effort and an easy effort, which is just vernacular that Lydiard used, and it's like the difference in 10% degree of maximum overall effort. So it's not a major difference. But when you talk to an athlete about that, almost always the athlete's going to say, well, actually, most of my easy runs are probably more like steady then. And it's like, yeah, so is that actually the 80% or the 20% now? Well, that's the question, isn't it? Because it could be both. So that's why that, as a rule, it's really difficult to say 80-20 is going to help you be successful, except for, as Andy mentioned, maybe just the overall perspective of don't be running so many runs so hard. So that's good. But what about some of the more specific ones? Okay, you've been hearing all of the fad around double threshold training and workouts, and that's the key to success. This goes back to the efficiency question again.
He's being facetious, by the way.
No, that's what a lot of people are saying, though. It's like, all these people are so much faster because they're doing double threshold training. No, that's okay. So is it more efficient to get in more hard work today, or to get in better work tomorrow and some hard work today? Right? Which one's more efficient? Is there some kind of balance? Do I do double threshold sometimes and then not other times? But I should say that just thinking about stress across like one day to another day is also potentially limiting, because the double threshold mindset actually says, how about just across sessions? You have multiple different potential sessions in a day, and you can do different stressors across multiple different sessions in a day. It's not just multiple days. So now you take into account another layer of potential training efficiencies, which, again, now you ask the question, is it better to take a load of training and say you can do 10 all at once, but if you did it, split it in half and did it twice, you could do 7 twice, which would now be 14 total in a day. Well, in that regard, shouldn't I take all of my runs over the course of the week, and I could have run an hour a day for a total of 7 hours, but instead split it into 2 45-minute runs every day, and now I'm running more. And so I'm not going to try to do that math in my head right now. So this is why you fall into this like kind of spiral. The reality is that if you're going to actually truly be able to benefit from the concept like double threshold training to the degree that you're supposed to, then you have to know very precisely whether you are doing the right amount of exertional effort. Because now no longer are you talking about a simple metric like pleasantly fatigued at the end of the run, because your iteration is too soon. So then that's why the Norwegian method is based off of sampling your blood lactate during the workout. They do that for two reasons. One, to check to make sure you're maintaining the level of intensity intended through the workout, and two, to know when it's time to stop, because they'll stop the workout after a certain level of blood lactate is maintained multiple times, like multiple intervals, for instance. And they do that because they know that if you're going to repeat another session later in the day, you can't exceed a certain level of blood lactate, or you're no longer able to gain as much adaptations later in the day. Same thing then applies. So if we really want to do this to the degree, like this perfect optimization mindset, we have to know those types of datum so that we can so that we can have
It's actually beneficial.
Right.
Because otherwise
Clarity.
it's not beneficial. It's not even helpful, which
you
is
don't
a
know.
bummer because you're working too hard. Yeah.
Yeah, so you see why I talk about this as a kind of rabbit hole spiral, because it's really just not that important to, like, do you want to do 2 hard efforts in one day? Go for it. But now you have to make sure you're not overdoing both of them. And in order to know whether or not that's working well, then you have to know how you feel the next day relative to how you would have felt after the other one. And how many of those can you do in a week and make sure that your week is still feeling good? And then how many of those weeks can you do for a month to make sure that... So you have to kind of experiment with it. Fundamentally, if you really want to know what's better for you, you've got to try them. You've got to experiment with them and have the comparison.
And be really good at recovering.
Well, yes, and you have to have that much time available to you, which is the main constraint for non-professional athletes. But then the other side of it is you have to be able to take into account things like types of adaptations. So the double threshold training is based on the assumption that running as much volume close to maximum lactate threshold as possible is the best thing. But that is not true in all moments in training. So double threshold training really should only be utilized during certain points, certain phases in the training process. And if you don't understand that, if you're not training in a way that's leveraging that understanding, that's dangerous. That's very difficult. So I'm not condemning it. I'm not endorsing it. But you're probably not doing it, because you're not a professional runner. We're assuming.
Well, there are some that are that listen. So
okay, for those two of you, you can do what you want, or what your coach wants. So let's talk about Lydiard's approach for a moment. Not because he is the the commandments of training, but because Lydiard's approach is emblematic of what you find most commonly in training approaches in general.
And also resonates with the things that Hobbs Kessler was saying.
Just so happens to be. So he says, okay, every day is a valuable stress. Every day is an opportunity to create adaptations in your training. So that's the first mindset. This means that in order to do that, we need to exert ourselves enough so that the next day we can still get a quality adaptation. And then you just do different types of adaptations and you rotate them about every other day. So you have lower effort, higher volume, and the adaptations you get from that. And you have higher effort, lower volume, and the adaptations you get from that. And even Lydiard did not do things the same way throughout his tenure coaching world-class athletes. So, I mean, like the exact types of hard efforts that he did were not always the same at different points in time. But he operated under two basic assumptions, which is that you should be able to handle an hour's worth of high effort running, and then the next day be able to handle a longer effort of easy running. And you need to be able to do that basically every day in rotation. That's the principle of it. He felt like it was necessary to get 3 longer runs in every week. That, of course, depends on how many days of the week you're actually training. But the principle here is about 50% of your runs in the week should be longer, easier efforts, and about 50% of your runs in the week should be shorter, harder efforts. And
but again, the percentages would be different because it's like the longer the run is, the more percentage of your training that is.
Right.
If you're thinking about easy versus hard.
Right. So total percent, like that 80-20 rule, we're not trying to apply it to that, but it's closer to...
Because you were using percentages. That's
right.
why I wanted to clarify.
Yep. And so total volumes of running, certainly. But the principle that you apply then in terms of efficiency is I can handle whatever I'm doing today to be able to get a quality adaptation tomorrow. But it's not going to be the same type of adaptation. I don't need to be able to run interval workouts every day. and
No.
and recover enough for that. But I need to
Don't
be
do
able
that.
to
Don't run intervals every day.
and I don't need to be able to run a long run every day and recover from that. But I need to be able to do something long and still a quality effort the next day, and something higher effort and still a quality effort the next day. And if I can find the balance in degree of effort within those categorical types of things, then I'm going to be fine. And exactly what I do, the specifics, are not nearly as important as that overall mindset. But it also depends on the phase of training that you're in as far as exactly what those things look like. So,
well, we appreciate Hobbs bringing up this important topic.
Yeah.
So we could discuss it on air.
Yeah. So, what can my body handle? How close can I get to regular quality stressors, physiological, but also like life circumstances and things? You know, training every day is not generally the norm for most adult fitness advocates, fitness pursuers, whatever words are not coming to mind.
Runners?
Yes, right.
For most runners.
So what does this look like to try to get in quality stressors as frequently as my life is going to allow me to do so? With that in mind, we're probably more likely to then avoid Kessler's stale period that he described and avoid things like burnout and injury and otherwise.
That's great. Well, let's get on now to updates from the world of running. Let's kick things off in the world of running with some A to Z runner updates, as we like to do. The Myrtle Beach Marathon featured 2 A to Z runners from different parts of the country, so kind of cool. Kate ran her 10th marathon, so that was a big one for her.
Right on. And Craig ran his 36th state.
Wow.
And his 50th marathon.
That's
lifetime
amazing.
Wise.
So cool.
It is indeed. Which, if you start to do the math, you're like, oh, Craig's run 36 states and 50 marathons. Like, most of his marathons have been in different states. He's only run a handful of repeats, which is kind of fun. Yes, Craig is on his quest to 50 states, and he's only got 14 left.
Congrats to both Kate and Craig.
Absolutely. Speaking of marathons.
Oh, yeah. The Tokyo Marathon kicking off the World Majors for 2025. In the men's race, there were headliners, 2 of the top marathoners, which is kind of interesting because we have a whole season now of these big marathons coming up, and 2 of the top marathoners were in this race. And that was Benson Kipruto and Daressa Galeta. I'm sorry, guys.
Kipruto of Kenya, Galeta of Ethiopia, and both have been repeat podium finishers across the board in all the most important things. And so when you say some of the top marathoners, certainly that. What is interesting right now is this general attempt that we're seeing in the running universe to try to like figure out who is like the top marathoner in the world. And it's like, if you recall, prior to the Kipchoge era, there was never a clear answer to that question.
You don't think so?
No.
Bekele?
No.
Okay.
Kenenisa Bekele?
Yeah.
Never.
Okay.
Well, first of all, he was never really great at the marathon until the Kipchoge
He's
era.
great.
No, until the Kipchoge era.
Yeah.
And he was never better than Kipchoge. So
Okay.
no.
Okay.
But in principle, it's very rare. You get someone who's like, oh, that person's the person to beat for a short stint, and then they get beat and beat repeatedly. Kipchoge was one of the only marathoners in the modern era to do what he did. You're talking about like the likes of like Paula Radcliffe and like those types of athletes. They're generational talents. And so, no, Benson Kipruto is amazing. Daressa Galeta has done well.
Yeah.
But they are also quite fallible. And
Well, it didn't
showed.
appear that Kipruto was fallible until this race, actually, because Kipruto ended up 6th place in a time of 2:05:46, and it's his first non-podium finish in a marathon.
Ever?
Oh, it's rare.
Yeah.
I guess
I don't
know for sure, but from like a big standpoint.
Yeah,
I'm
especially
pretty sure. I don't know.
Well,
I guess I should double check my work now that you're second guessing me.
the stat that was shared was an obscure one. It was like since the end of 2024, and then I was like, wait a second, end of 2024 was just a little bit ago.
Oh, well,
So
okay. So
it is a confusing, like, he's done well, certainly, but he doesn't win most of the time.
That's true.
And so that's one of the reasons why people are like, is he really all that great? Well, yeah, he finishes top 3 a lot.
Right.
But he didn't here.
Right.
Neither did Galeta. So
who won, Zach?
what instead ended up being the case was, you could say, an upset winner, because it was Tadesse Tekele of Ethiopia, who is young.
21 years old.
And it only debuted in the marathon a year and a half ago after being an Olympic steeplechaser as a teenager, the ripe young age of like 17 or 18 when he ran in the 2021 Olympic Games. And so Tekele ran a outstanding debut marathon in the 2023 Berlin race, 2:03:24. But then in 2024 Berlin, not as great. And so he wasn't necessarily on the radar for this one. He's only run a couple of marathons.
Right.
But he still won. And he did so in impressive fashion. So you got to hand that one to him.
Yeah.
He has now run an impressive debut and won a World Marathon Majors. And so keep an eye on Tekele.
Mm-hmm. Back in 9th, we need to mention Joshua Cheptegei from Uganda running 2:05:59, which, even though it's a personal best, was not the expectation for him, because you remember he's a 2-time Olympic champion, world record holder in the 5,000 and the 10,000 on the track. And so when he moved to the roads, there was some anticipation, like, what can he do? Can he break world records? You know, there was a lot of expectation, so to speak, for Joshua Cheptegei. So we'll see. Maybe it was a bad day. Who knows? Maybe the long distance is not where he shines. So we're yet to see that, because it does take some time for distance runners to really find their potential and strategy and figure themselves out.
Say that to Tekele.
Yeah, I guess. It doesn't always. Apparently, there's some people who just rise and shine.
Well, what it amounts to is Cheptegei's in the majority when you have the great track stars who don't find immediate success in the marathon.
Right.
That's usually the case. It's very rare. I mean, Kenenisa Bekele, for instance, Andy mentioned earlier, when he first started marathoning, was not very successful. It took a bit to kind of figure it out some. And then, he's run like the 3rd or 4th fastest time ever and some other good things, but it's not easy. No. And Cheptegei's not there yet. He has said he's committed to it. He's going to keep trying. We'll see.
Host country, Tokyo being Japan, wanted to mention that 4 guys ran 2:06 from Japan, so that was a solid showing for them.
That is what they do.
On the women's side, this was maybe more of an expected champion, but Satuma Asefa Kabede is now the first woman to win 2 Tokyo titles, and it was back-to-back. She's the defending champion.
Yeah, which is very impressive. You have to understand that the modern Tokyo Marathon, such as it is right now, is not even 20 years old. They've only been running the race in this form for about 18 years. And so it's not a very long stretch we're talking about when we say first woman to win 2 titles. But at the same time, there have been a lot of great marathoners who have run the Tokyo Marathon more than once, and she is the first to take 2 and defend her title back-to-back years.
Yeah, and it seems that she runs positive splits, and it works for her.
Notoriously
runs positive
Doesn't always
splits.
work for her.
For this race, she ran 66:20 for her first half marathon and 70:11 for her second. So both really fast, but that first one is so much faster.
Each 5K split from the half on was slower.
Yeah.
It looked on the scoreboard, on the time charts, it looked painful. As a matter of fact, her last couple of miles were like almost a minute per mile slower than
she goes for it. Miles. She goes for it. I guess she knows how to suffer. She was suffering. It looked like she was suffering.
She did win 2 Tokyo Marathon titles. She's doing something right.
Yeah.
But.
And then notably, you mentioned Paula Radcliffe and her reign. Well, after a 10-year hiatus from running marathons at 51 years old, she ran the Tokyo Marathon in 2:57. And she also plans to run Boston because she wants to run all the world majors.
True that.
New goals, new stage of life.
New goals. I'm over 50 years old. I can do something new.
We can all do something new.
Well, before we get on to something new, let's talk about indoor track still, because we had essentially what was the last of the domestic indoor track competitions. Now we have the World Indoor Track Championships in China happening shortly, and we'll be filling you in. It's going to be exciting. But before that, and before the NCAA National Championships, we had the final BU meet, which is notoriously fast, that track. So everyone goes there to run fast.
Famously.
Notoriously as well, because everyone thinks it's cheating to run on that track now.
No.
Yeah, they actually like talk about how you can step on the track and say, whoa.
Oh,
like
really?
You
It's
feel
bouncy.
it.
Ooh, I want to do it.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
Send me there.
Just wear the dragonfly spikes on the BU track, and you
I'll get
will
a
be
PR.
able to run anything you want. Anything you want. You actually can just
don't need
name
to
it
train.
and then go do it, and it'll happen. So that's what everyone did at this meet, and we'll get to Yard Nugus's retaking of the world record mile attempt here.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, let's talk about the men's 5,000, because Nico Young ran for the W in a U.S. number 2 indoor time behind only the GOAT, Grant Fisher himself, who, by the way, has the world record. So U.S. number 2 doesn't look so bad when U.S. number 1 is a world record. It also, by the way, Young's time is number 5 on the world list for the short track. So,
sweet.
Yes, very cool.
Way to go.
We're in 12:51.
And do you know how far he was from Fisher's time?
There's
a gap, right?
7 seconds.
Oh, 7.
Yes.
That's not... okay.
Fisher crushed the world record when he ran it. But it's notable that Nico Young's time is 0.05 seconds ahead of Woody Kincaid's time.
Okay.
So Woody Kincaid being now number 6 in the world list. Adrian Rilschut of South Africa also ran a new South African record. It's his own time before, but is still a new record in 12:55 when he was second behind Nico Young.
This was a fun one. The women's mile, always one of my favorites.
Always.
Heather McLean ran a big PR and also a massive win, outshining her competition by a long shot. 4 seconds ahead of her next competitor, and ran a U.S. number 2 and world number 5 of 4:17. And get this, en route to that, she was awarded the U.S. indoor 1,500 meter record with a time of 3:59.60. So that was big for Heather McLean.
Do you get paid twice if you get 2 records in one race?
I hope so.
You should.
Because it's 2 different records.
I bet there's a subtext somewhere in the contract that says it has to be separate
partial or something.
Instances, separate days. But because if you're doing a field event, you can't get the world record bonus 2 times in one competition on a pole vault, for instance.
But they're one. That's one record.
It's 2 different. Yeah, okay. I don't know. Well, anyway, she did. She got the 1,500. She missed by 1 second, not even a full second. She missed the indoor mile U.S. record, which is held by Ellie St. Pierre.
Where's she been this season?
I don't know, but she just set that record last year, if you recall.
Right, I do remember. It was exhilarating.
Yeah. Behind McLean, there was an Italian record for Sintayehu Visa, who ran 4:21, and right next to her, a Kiwi record for Maya Ramsden, who also ran 4:21. So some national records across the boards here.
It's interesting. Gisette Andrews bested her own U.S. number 2 by 2 seconds in the women's 5,000, and she ran a time of 14:44, which is really impressive.
Yeah. So she's still U.S. number 2, but
she's still U.S. number 2, but she beat her own time, her personal best now.
Yep.
14:44. That's smoking.
So how about that world record mile attempt?
Okay, tell us about it, Zach.
It didn't happen.
It was an attempt. He did attempt.
He did try.
Yes.
Yard Nagoose, not to be outdone by Kinga Brixton, as they're calling him. Oh, yeah.
That's a bad one.
I like it. I like it.
I'm cringing.
Jacob Kinga Brixton.
Oh, no.
So, yes, it is true. He took Nagoose's mile record. Basically, Nagoose set the mile record, and he was like, so what? I could do that, too. And then they're like, prove it. And he's like, oh, I've never run indoor track, but I'll still do it. And he did. So Kinga Brixton himself, I'm going to keep doing it. I love it. It's so funny.
That's gnarly.
He ran 3:45 and change. Besting Yard Nagoose is 3:46 and change. So Nagoose went for it again here at BU. And he still ran his second best time, but
it just wasn't the day. You have to have the day to get a world record.
it just is a reminder that these are really fast times.
Right.
Like, even though it's easy for Ingebrigtsen, it's not easy for anybody else to do.
It wasn't easy for him either.
It looked like it, though.
That's what he always wants.
I know. So the Goose ran 3:47. He won the race still, but it was Ollie Hoare for a personal best behind him in second. Teammate,
That's great.
On Athletics
Glad to
Club.
see Ollie Hoare getting a PB. That's great.
True that. He ran a personal best, but he can't even come close to his teenage countryman who holds the Australian record.
That's rude.
You're
so rude.
kidding.
Ollie, if you're listening.
Ollie doesn't listen to our
Zach
podcast.
is rude.
I am joking, but that's what that's what the difficulty is these days is even though you get races like the Millrose Mile where it's like so many people running fast, it's just a reminder that it is hard to run that fast.
And that's why anytime you get a taste of success at this level, you have to embrace it and savor it, because you just never know. You can't control other people. You don't know what's coming, and the sport is just on the rise.
It's exciting times.
It is.
So we've got one last event here to cover right now, which is the USA Half Marathon Championships, USATF Half Marathon Championships. This race in particular was notable because top 3 finishers got an invitation to the World Half Marathon Championships held in San Diego, USA in September.
Which will be way better conditions than what they had for this race, which was windy, nasty, and cold.
Freezing.
Yeah. I feel like wind and cold, that's just bitter, you know?
San Diego in September is going to be like perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
wonderful.
if you like running in 70 degrees, I guess.
I guess it might be hot, but I don't know.
Nah. It's on the ocean. It's not too bad. All right,
so this was exciting, right?
It was exciting, and in particular, we teased in the introduction that there may be some unknown names here, and in particular, we're just very curious if you even know who these athletes are who won the race. Not because there wasn't anyone in the race, but because these two in particular had some serious moments, some very impressive days. So we're going to talk about that.
Yep, starting with the women's race. The National Half Marathon record holder, Wayne Kaladi, was the favorite. Her personal best over a minute faster than any other woman in the race. Her PB is also the national record, 1:06:09. And she went out hard, controlled the race, and just didn't have it in the later stages. It kind of looked like she just didn't have the best of days because her times are faster than the winning times. But it was Taylor Rowe and Emma Grace Hurley who ended up reeling Kaladi in. And Rowe ended up with the win, running a personal best time of 1:07:22, chopping
That's no joke
to a minute off of her PR.
Yep.
In gross conditions. Okay.
That's no joke.
No joke. Runner-up was Hurley, also running a big PR. Not too much of a surprise that it was a big PR, though, because this is her only second half marathon. So who knows what her potential is? Like, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Taylor Rowe, not long out of college herself, so fairly new on the scene here, reasonably so. And as such, kind of a surprise victor in the race, especially a race where the U.S. record holder is in it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Very good. It was Amanda Vestry in third to round out the top 3, so now all 3 of those are invited to join Team USA, to represent Team USA in September. Whether or not they all will, we don't actually know that for sure yet, but we're assuming so.
Yeah, I would imagine.
Safe assumptions.
Given the conditions, Let's Run said it was remarkable that the first 10 women broke 1:10, which is saying good things for women's distance running.
On the men's side, similar story, which is to say it was faster than one would have expected and also unexpected victor. So 2-time Olympic steeplechaser Hillary Bohr, who held the 10-mile U.S. record until Conor Mantz broke it en route to his half marathon record. He took it out hard, which is something Hillary Bohr likes to do. He is very familiar with the road scene of late and has been very successful.
Not just of late, like late, because he's been doing it for years.
Yeah, the last few years now.
Yeah.
So Hillary Bohr, 2-time Olympic steeplechaser, has found even greater success at the domestic level on the roads than he had even on the track. So he's doing He's doing a great job of it. But he is an aggressive racer. He likes to run fast, and he likes to run for the win every single time.
Yep. And he revealed in an interview that he didn't want it to come down to a kick with so many 10K guys in the race. So that's why he took it out and wanted to control it.
It's so funny when someone's like, those kickers, those 10K guys. It's like all those 10K guys are always like, those milers, they're kickers. It's funny. But it's true. When you don't feel like you're the one with the best kick in the race, you don't want it to come down to a kick.
Right. He's strategic. Kind of the stuff that he learned as a steeplechaser. That's a very strategic race. I mean, probably one of the most strategic races, competitive races that you get, because you have to be so thoughtful on how the race plays out. So Hillary Bohr, he surged at mile 8. People didn't go with him, so he backed off a bit. And then newly graduated Alex Mayer took the lead at about 15K.
Alex Mayer of Oklahoma State University.
Yeah. Who
has not done a lot of half marathon racing, if any. I don't know how many he's actually run, but he takes the lead in a field like Hillary Bohr, Shadrach Kipchirchir, and others. Nate Martin was in the field.
Yeah.
Yep. And Mayer goes to the front.
Right.
Not just like at the
surge,
end.
Yeah.
But like to take over.
Right. At 15K.
That's
and
awesome.
Only Bohr and Kipchirchir went with him. And then it was a mile to go, and Mayer dropped both Bohr and Kipchirchir to win dominantly.
Really impressive stuff.
Yep. And Kipchirchir ended up finishing second, Bohr in third. So that's your 3 who will be invited to the World Championships in September.
All 3 men under 61 minutes, which is a great U.S. half marathon championship for sure, in particular in those conditions. So very impressive stuff.
So I left this to reveal at the end because this is so interesting. Both the men's and women's winners are former Oklahoma State All-Americans and recent graduates.
Yep.
Which is so unlikely.
Yep.
And it was a surprise to everyone that both of them won. And there they are.
First U.S. titles.
Too. Yep.
First time representing Team USA.
Yeah.
It's pretty exciting stuff. So there you have it.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of great things happening always, and we've got a lot more coming in store for you. We're going to plant a bug in your ear right now because we are contemplating a change in format we're going to test soon on the podcast, which is releasing content more frequently with more focus. And so as opposed to a weekly episode that's covering a bunch of different kinds of things, we might have multiple episodes in a week where some are just focused on a training topic and some are just focused on running news and updates and some of that kind of stuff. And so we're not going to let you know when. It's just one day we're going to start doing it to try it out, and we're very interested in knowing if you like it.
Please tell us your opinions.
So comment on the places that you ingest the content, or you can always reach out to us via our typical email, which is questions@AtoZrunning.com, and share any thoughts. We love to hear them. We love to know them, and you will definitely experience whatever those changes may be sometime soon. It's going to be fun.
Thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.